In 1607, 104 Englishmen sailed into the Chesapeake Bay, expecting to build a wealthy empire and find fields of gold. Instead, they anchored their galleons in a murky, isolated, and highly lethal swamp. The Virginia companies sent a roster heavily weighted with upper-class gentlemen and lacking in skilled farmers. Unaccustomed to manual labor and entirely unprepared for the reality of the wilderness, they spent their days drinking salt-poisoned water from the tidal river. Within months, malaria and dysentery began tearing through their ranks. This map illustrates the reality of the territory they claimed. The English had planted themselves directly inside Tennecomeko, a massive alliance of roughly 30 distinct Algonquian tribes commanded by Chief Powhatan. The settlers were trespassing on established hunting grounds, vastly outnumbered by a sophisticated native empire that controlled the region's resources. The imperial fantasy evaporated. Before the first year was out, the romantic goal of building a lucrative English utopia had collapsed into a brutal day-to-day struggle to avoid extinction. By the winter of 1609, Chief Powhatan realized the settlers were entirely dependent on his corn and decided to starve them out. This counter tracks the number of English colonists trapped inside James Fort. He severed all trade and besieged the fort, locking 500 desperate men and women behind their wooden palisades. Trapped inside, the food stores vanished. The colonists ate their remaining horses, then dogs, cats, rats, and the leather from their own shoes. When those ran out, they dug up the dead, resorting to survival cannibalism to endure the freezing months. When relief ships finally reached the river in May of 1610, they found the fort in ruins. The palisades were torn down for firewood, and the survivors were so broken by starvation and disease that the new governor ordered the complete evacuation of Jamestown. They boarded ships to abandon the continent forever before being intercepted by an incoming fleet and forced back to shore. The original corporate model of sending gentlemen to search for gold was a total lethal failure. Surviving here would require a much darker, more calculated approach. The salvation of the colony came from a smuggler. A settler named John Rolfe arrived with a stash of tobacco seeds he had illegally acquired from the Spanish Caribbean. The local native tobacco was too bitter for European tastes, but Rolfe's new strain flourished in the rich Virginia soil, creating a highly addictive and immediately profitable export. Tobacco is a notoriously nutrient-hungry crop. It exhausts the soil within a few years. To maintain the massive profits from this brown gold, the colonists pushed far beyond the safety of James Fort, carving sprawling new plantations deep into Powhatan territory. Protecting these isolated, vulnerable farms required an immediate halt to the violence. That stability arrived in 1614 through the diplomatic maneuvering of Powhatan's daughter, Pocahontas. Her conversion and subsequent marriage to John Rolfe brokered a fragile but highly lucrative truce between the natives and the English. The search for mythical gold was over. The colony was now a massive agricultural enterprise, driven by the relentless commodification of land and shielded by strategic, temporary alliances. By 1619, the volume of tobacco being shipped back to England meant the Virginia Company needed to transition Jamestown from an outpost of temporary laborers into a permanent society. They recruited and shipped over dozens of single women to marry planters and establish families, anchoring the workforce in place. They also imported specialized European artisans, including Polish and Slovak craftsmen, to build out the colony's industries. When these workers realized they had no political voice in the newly formed House of Burgesses, they stopped working. It was the first recorded labor strike in North America, and they won, securing full voting rights for themselves. But the democratic victory of those European workers collided with another arrival that exact same year. Down the river at Point Comfort, a Dutch warship dropped anchor and traded 20-odd captive Africans to the English. While the striking European craftsmen were able to leverage their labor for political power, these Africans had been stolen from a Portuguese slave ship. They were forced into the tobacco fields to perform grueling agricultural work with no rights and no leverage. These two events occurred mere weeks apart. The colony formalized representative government for its white citizens while laying the groundwork for race-based human exploitation, intertwining democratic freedom with forced labor to feed an expanding economic machine. The English appetite for tobacco land meant the colonists constantly encroached further into native territory. The peace could not hold. In March of 1622, the new Powhatan leader, Chief Opechancanough, executed a massive coordinated morning assault across the English settlements. Nearly 350 settlers, a full quarter of the English population, were killed in hours. In response, the Virginia Company abandoned any pretense of peaceful coexistence. The English regrouped and waged a 10-year campaign of retaliation aimed at the total subjugation of the Powhatan people. Violent expansion and warfare were now permanent features of the business model. To grow the colony's wealth, the settlers had to continuously push outward, and they were willing to fight a perpetual war to do it. Over the next 50 years, the system enriched a small group of elite planters, while pushing newly freed servants and poorer settlers out to the dangerous frontier margins. By 1676, those frontier settlers were heavily taxed, constantly fighting with native tribes, and completely cut off from the colony's wealth. Led by Nathaniel Bacon, they violently rebelled. They slaughtered friendly and hostile native tribes alike, then marched on their own colonial government. Bacon and his militia forced the royal governor to flee and set fire to Jamestown, burning the original settlement to the ground. The physical town never recovered. The State House burned down again 2 decades later, prompting the government to permanently relocate the capital inland to Williamsburg. Jamestown Island was left behind to return to the swamp. While the town itself vanished, its core systems, representative government, cash crops, and slave labor, had already been institutionalized. Jamestown survived by converting human lives and native land into a profitable commodity. It was a business.